Hello, everybody out there. Hope everybody's doing well with your Christmas and everything. So, in this video, we are going to bring the conclusion of the debunk on the global warming factor for all of you. Now, I can keep putting up videos to keep trying to get you to understand that there is no global warming and that it's a fraud. Okay, but the best way I'm going to do this now is I'm going to show you a clip of a video that explains pretty much everything. Okay, and if you watch this video, the full video, I'm going to show you a clip of specifically about the CO2 factor, and I'm going to put the description or the video into the description, and then after you're done with my video, go to that video and you'll see the whole thing laid out in scientific fact that there is no global warming. Global warming is a fraud. Okay, it is a fraud to get your money through carbon taxes. Okay, that is the end result. That is why this is a fraud, because they have manipulated the data, the scientific data, to their own means. They've used models. You can't use a model in a scientific research thing because of the data is inconclusive and it's manipulative. Okay. So basically what has been going on is we have been lied to, manipulated, coerced, you name it, to make us think that there's this big catastrophe that we've got to be so concerned that we shut down industries and so forth and grab your taxes. Call it another tax. Now, I'm not with an oil company, okay? I don't stand any personal gain in putting this out there to you people. The reason for me to put this out there is because I don't like being led down a garden path that is bullshit. And that's what this is. Global warming is a path of bullshit. Okay? And it's time for everybody to wake up and smell the coffee, because if you don't, this country in Canada is going to go down the shitter. Plain and simple. Because you're going to pay the federal government and provincial governments a tax on the air that you breathe. This is now becoming the globe. The air is becoming a tax here. CO2 carbon is bullshit, and I'm going to show you why in this next clip. So stay tuned, and then I have comments after. So get educated.
Here's a critical question. Is CO2 capable of causing global warming? That's what underlies all of these discussions. And that's the main contention of the whole climate change debate. What you may not be aware of is that there's almost no CO2 in the atmosphere. It's very small. It's 39 one-thousandths of 1%. If we take a bucket of air out of this room and measure it, we will get 39 one-thousandths of 1% CO2. It's almost nothing. If you double nothing, you've still got nothing. Since 1950s, since this big escalation of emission of CO2, the composition of the atmosphere, the CO2 composition, has increased by only 8 one-thousandths of 1%. That's almost as close to nothing as you can get. You can triple that and you still have nothing. There is not enough CO2 in the atmosphere to do much of anything. And then you add to that CO2 accounts for only 3.6% of the greenhouse effect. Only 3% of the greenhouse gas effect is CO2. 95% is water vapor. So the point of this is that CO2 by itself is incapable of significant global warming. That's the bottom line. I'll say it again. CO2 by itself is incapable of causing significant global warming. And so how do we get these projections in? And we get it because the climate modelers who depend on computer models rather than real data for their conclusions have decided that if CO2 goes up, water vapor will also increase. And as water vapor increases, we kick in this 95% of the greenhouse effect. So virtually all of the temperature increase during the warm period that we had in 77 to 98, virtually all of that they would account for by water vapor in their models, not CO2, water vapor. So the question is water vapor increasing? Well, here's water vapor. Here's water vapor going back to 1947. Water vapor, if water vapor is increasing as CO2 goes up, and that's what's levering the global warming, then you might have an argument for their models. But water vapor is actually decreased since 1947. Look at the downward trend. Down is less water vapor in the atmosphere. And these are various levels of the atmosphere. So in order for their models to be correct, they must show that there has been an increase in water vapor in the atmosphere, and it's just the opposite. There is less water vapor in the atmosphere now as CO2 has gone up, not more, and so their models are totally invalid. Their models will not work without an increase in water vapor. There's another effect of CO2, which is called a saturation effect. If you take a dry sponge and dip it in a bucket of water, it'll soak up water. If you take a wet sponge and put it in a bucket of water, it doesn't soak up very much more water, does it? Because it's already saturated. And CO2 operates the same way. There's a saturation level wherein the CO2, which is in the atmosphere right now, is mostly saturated with respect to capturing of the frequencies of heat. And so on this curve right here, this is the degree in possible temperature change with increasing in atmospheric carbon dioxide. This 1950 level is right here, 2008 level is right here. The maximum amount of temperature change you could get from the increase in CO2 from 1950, when the whole thing started to escalate for emissions, and now is less than 1/10 of a degree. This is basic physics. What about just making a correlation between CO2 and temperature? On this curve, this is atmospheric temperature, atmospheric CO2 on this side, and surface temperature on this side. So here's the CO2 curve, which has been increasing, been going up steadily, no doubt about it. From 1915 to 1945, we had global warming with no increase appreciably in CO2. So CO2 didn't cause that warming. In this century, hotter than it is now. And then when CO2 was escalating in 1945 on, we actually had global cooling. The curve is actually going the opposite direction of the CO2 curve. If CO2 causes global warming, why don't we have 30 years of global cooling when it began to escalate? Doesn't make any sense. It's only in this last period from 1978 to 1998 when the two have coincided by coincidence. We can also show that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere always follows an increase in temperature, not the other way around. The idea would be that if CO2 is causing global warming, CO2 would go up and then the temperature would go up, okay? But here's what actually happens, and these are measurements that have been made by a group of researchers in Norway. The blue curve down here is temperature. Temperature's been going up and down, as it does every few years, largely because of ocean changes. And this is the CO2 content of the atmosphere. In every case, temperature goes up and then CO2 follows. If CO2 was causing this temperature to go up, it should precede it, but it doesn't. It follows it in every case and by about the same amount. And this is for short-term changes. The same is true for long-term changes. So the conclusions about CO2 is that the amount in the atmosphere is minuscule. The total change is so small that there is absolutely no way it can cause global warming by itself. It's totally dependent on water vapor, and there's no correlation between global temperatures and CO2. When CO2 goes up, temperature does whatever it wants to do. The comparison of computer model predictions of global warming, when you compare those to actual measurements to see if the models were right, they are totally inaccurate. The models are totally inaccurate. And I'll show you an instance of that in just a minute. The bottom line is CO2 is not capable of causing significant global warming by itself. That's clear from the physics. CO2 is a result of global warming, not the cause of global warming. As you increase the temperature, you increase the CO2 in the atmosphere because there's more that's given up by the oceans.
Dr. Eastbrook, you use the term greenhouse effect.
I'm sorry, a greenhouse effect is caused by certain gases that will absorb certain frequencies in the electromagnetic spectrum, namely heat. And so the idea would be that as heat is coming from the surface of the Earth upward, being radiated back into space, that certain gases will tend to capture it, if you like, and make the air warmer. And that's why we have such a pleasant climate. It's because we have a lot of water vapor that keeps us nice and warm. Otherwise, we'd be cold because all the heat would radiate out into space. So think of gases that capture heat is the easiest way to think of it.
And I guess I raised the point because the greenhouse effect is not a negative thing.
It's not what?
It's not a negative thing, the greenhouse effect.
The greenhouse
allows
effect
us to live here.
Yeah. The greenhouse effect, the tendency of the greenhouse effect is for various molecules, mostly water vapor, to make the atmosphere warmer by capturing of heat. Okay? How about sea level? Let's take a quick look at sea level. This is one of my favorite pictures. It's in New York City with the predicted sea level rise by 2100 by certain people in the UN and other people who shall remain nameless, but who are big advocates of CO2. Actually, I kind of like it. I'm not a big fan of New York, and so it would be kind of fun to see New York as an island. But there are serious ramifications if this were true. Here's Florida, for example, and this is the present coast of Florida. Here's what the coast of Florida would look like if sea level were to rise to the predicted level by the UN agencies. And here's what the old coastline, this is what the coastline looks like now. This is what it would look like if sea level rose somewhere between 5 and 20 feet. The poster child of rising sea level is the Maldive Islands, and you're going to see a big program on TV about how the poor people in the Maldives are going to be drowning and they're going to have to move the entire nation. A world-renowned sea level expert has had to go see for himself what was really there, and what he found was this, that in this picture, for example, this is the 1979 shoreline right here. This is where the sea level was in 1979. Here's where it is now. Here's another place. This is where the sea level was in 1979. Here's where it is now. The irony is that the Maldives are emerging from the oceans, not sinking. They're not being drowned, they're coming up out of the ocean. Here's proof positive. This is documented with the dates of when the shoreline was here, with photographs and measurements, and sea level is actually lower since 1979. It's not sinking. So how much is sea level changing? We've been thawing out from the Little Ice Age, which was about 500 years ago. And temperatures have been rising during that period at a rate of about 0.8 degree a century, no doubt about it. And as that's happened, sea level has been rising, partly as a result of expansion of the volume of the oceans with the warmer temperatures. And the rate of rise, this is the rate of sea level rise. This is the year. They've been rising at a rate in the early days about 1.5 millimeters a year. That's about the thickness of your fingernail per year. You wouldn't be aware of it. So the total sea level rise in the past century is about 6 inches, not that much. In our lifetimes, it wouldn't rise enough we'd even be aware of it. Here is the official sea level record from the University of Colorado, going back to about 1993, and sea level was been rising at about the same rate, 1 to 3 millimeters a year. It actually went down for a while, from about 206 to 208, and then now it's going up and down a bit, something like that. So no doubt, sea level is going up. The question is, how fast is it going up? Seattle has a really good sea level record, tidal gauge record. This is relative sea level, so we start here in about 1900, and we have records then that go all the way. In this case, they end about 2003 or 2004, and they could be extended. But here's the rate of rise. It's about 7 inches per century. Other areas nearby, Victoria, Vancouver, show the same kind of rise. about 6 or 7 inches a century. But in some places, it's going the other way. For example, Neah Bay, sea level is going down at a rate such that by 2100 it would be lower by 7 inches, not higher. Here's Astoria, 1.7 inches lower at the rate it's going, the present trend. So there are some differences up and down the coastline of the West Coast, which is brought about by local conditions primarily. The global sea level is rising at about 8 inches a century. That's clear. So what about the state of Washington? What about our sea level, peninsula sea level rise? Here's the curve of sea level from 1993. This is measured up to where we are right now. And if you project that into the future, you get a sea level rise by 2100 of about 7 inches. Not going to be a problem. Here's what the UN agency is predicting. This is their lower estimate. This is their higher estimate. And they're predicting somewhere by 2100, 5 to 20 feet. Look how this curve, the UN curve, varies from reality. Not very realistic, I think. And there's no reason to think that there's going to be any change in this rise. It's been very constant for the past century as we've been warming up. In order to get sea level rise like this, you'd have to melt the Antarctic ice cap. And we've already seen that's not going to happen. It's not happening now. It hasn't happened in 15 million years, and it isn't going to happen in the future. It's very simple. So sea level has risen only 7 inches as we're thawing out. Rate of sea level is pretty constant, not accelerating. Some places sea level is actually going down. It's going down Alaska. That is, these areas are emerging. Maldives, Neah Bay, Astoria, they're getting lower, not submerging. The IPCC, this is the UN agency, predicted large sea level rise is unrealistic because global warming has stopped, for one thing, and the Antarctic ice sheet is not melting. The projections are for sea level rise in the Pacific Northwest about 6 inches by the end of the century.
Okay, guys, so that's just some of the highlights there. The section there is the CO2 section. But there's much more. Okay, there's much more data that he explains in that clip, so that's why it's very important for you to have a boo on that video. But the problem remains that, you know, we've got to face facts here, people. Okay, I mean, we can sit back and do nothing, or we can get involved. If you've been led down the wrong path, wouldn't you be a little upset? Wouldn't you want to do something about it? If somebody was leading you down the wrong path so that they could, you know, take a huge chunk of everybody's money, call it another tax, and so on. This is what we've got to face, people. We've got to face the fact that we've been hornswoggled, you know, I mean, like, duped. You know, these environmentalists have gone off the deep end. You know, it's okay to be an environmentalist and everything, but I mean, when you're leading an entire nation down the path of destruction, you know, that's got to come to a halt. Because you guys are way off on left base because you don't like oil companies. You know, or coal companies, or anything that is the progress or the stability of what keeps our country going. Without oil products and without, you know, all the technology that we presently have, we're crippling the country, and this crap about these windmills and stuff and stuff. Wake up, open up your eyes. Go to Rebel media, and you know, the evidence is in there about these windmills and so on and so on. I mean, this is a project to steal money because it's false. It's a false understanding of the science. They're manipulating the science to their own ends so that they can carry out this fraud. So, if you're new on the channel, get into the subscription of the channel and write your comments down. I'd be very interested to hear them. Subscribe and keep in touch. It's a political channel. We're trying to make a movement here on this channel. And I realize the numbers aren't up there, but maybe there's some way I can figure out to get this out to you. I don't know, but I'm gonna upload it on YouTube, and I don't know how many people are gonna see this. I don't know. There's a lot of shit going on YouTube right now, and it's really having a big impact or an effect on us new guys coming out here and trying to explain things to you, especially stuff like this, because it's very important. If we don't get a handle on this, this is going to be the biggest ripoff that there is, because there's no need for this. And this government is off the rails. Okay, I mean, our Mr. Prime Minister Trudeau likes to give money to all these other countries and accept money from communist parties, speaking of the Chinese. And, you know, I don't see where he's helping the poor people or the people of this country by doing what he's been doing, especially trying to push us into a fraudulent tax when there is no global warming. He's not helping his countrymen. He's only trying to push the fact that he wants your money and ruin industry. You know, Rachel Notley in Edmonton, for the Alberta Premier, ruining industry, left, right, and center. You've got Western feedlots left. You've got, you know, oil projects that aren't going ahead. She's literally crippling the province. And this is what this is going on. This is what is happening. This is just the tip of the iceberg, though, compared to what's coming up next. So I urge you to get in touch with this channel, sign the petitions that we put together, get a part of the movement, get to be a part of the movement, okay, on this channel. We're in touch with also Friends of Science if you want more data. But I urge you very strongly to get in touch with reality, because they've been brainwashing everybody regarding this global warming, and it's been going on for quite some time. And I've pulled out some of the fraudsters on my channel. David Suzuki's one of them. There are a few others, and they're up there preaching global warming, but there's no scientific proof behind it. It's a myth. It's an idea. It's not science. Science is what we've got to go by, not myth, not these modules that they've come up with, and not computer science, because that's not science, according to being able to predict weather and so forth and so forth. You know, I mean, science is science, you know, and if you manipulate the science, then it's not science anymore. It's bullshit. What's on this video I gave you a clip of is science, okay? And if you go to the description and pull up the video and watch all of it, just keep an open mind, and slowly start to understand that it's not global warming, it's a ripoff. And I'm just getting the word out there. Thanks for watching, and do get involved.